Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Tuesday night, September 15, 2015 edition of Nightcast. In the U.S. state of California, more than 20,000 people have been forced to flee their homes by wildfires, which are burning out of control. In one blaze alone in Lake County, at least one person has died, and nearly 2,500 firefighters back the flames. James Coop from the BBC reports from Lake County.
In California, this is the sound of summer. They call it the Valley Fire, and no one here can remember like it. It has already consumed an area twice the size of San Francisco, and still it burns. The fire leaves behind a landscape drained of colour, silent, lifeless. No one knows for sure how many homes have been destroyed. The latest count is nearly 600, with 9,000 properties still at risk.
We were standing right there, back of the house, and it was rolling down the canyon right here, and we just had to get the hell out of here.
For Greg Conley, there was no choice but to flee, leaving behind his beloved ranch, Blossom Springs. It had stood here for 130 years, but it was gone in minutes.
One spark on the front porch, and away that baby went. So all the outbuildings gone, you know.
And you say it was a firestorm?
It was a firestorm. It wasn't just a fire, it was a firestorm.
Further up the mountain, entire streets have been wiped out. The ashes are still smouldering. For mile after mile, this is what the fire has done, reducing home after home to ashes. People have still not been allowed back up here to see the damage for themselves, but when they do return, many are likely to find there is nothing to salvage. For now, this is where they wait for news, in the winelands of Napa Valley, a camp for the homeless.
We just saw the flames and going down the hill, our whole family, we're just like, nope, no more time, can't pack anything, just go.
Back on the front line of the fire, the fight goes on. Among this crew, the very first firefighter on the scene of the blaze, Andy Elliott, on secondment from the UK to learn about wildfires.
The speed that it was moving was incredible. I've never seen anything like this. The firefighters here describe this as a career fire. They have never seen this before. It's once in a lifetime, certainly for me and for many of the people that are here.
And there is still no end in sight. This fire burns and burns, and California is counting the cost. James Cook, BBC News, in Lake County.
And friends, we go from today's news with never-ending fire, as if it were, to a story in the U.S. state of Utah about floods that have killed. Now, one person was killed so far in the California fires. 9 people, at least 9 people, have been killed, and 5 are missing. Officials say in this flood in Utah. The flooding was reported for CBS News in the U.S.
Witness video shows not only the power of the deadly flash floods, but also the desperate effort to save lives. Here, crews one by one pull women and children out of a packed car being swept away by raging water. Just in time, everyone got out.
I'm not thinking this is too safe.
But there are some people missing in southern Utah. Fire officials say 16 women and children in 2 vehicles were washed away Monday evening when severe storms sent floodwaters down canyons in the town of Hilldale.
As far as who is survivors, who's missing, we don't know at this point.
Through the night, the search continued for more victims. The youngest is thought to be just 4 years old. There were 3 survivors.
And friends, continuing in that line of despair in weather situations. We go overseas to Brother Reuben. Now, in saying that, let me comment on this. These first two stories relate to the United States, which is primarily the people of the United States are the modern-day descendants of one of Joseph's sons named Manasseh. The other son, Ephraim, the modern-day descendants are in the UK. But we go from fire, that they don't see an end in sight on this firestorm, as one man put it. And in Utah, just the opposite, we have flooding. Now, I've mentioned many times that cause and effect. God says so in His Word. In 2 chapters, He tells us in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, 2 chapters we refer to as the blessing and cursing chapters. God starts out in both of those chapters saying, if you obey, if you diligently hearken to my voice and obey my commands and my statutes and my judgments, then I'll bless you. Leviticus 26, verse 4, after saying, if you obey, I'll bless you, God says, I will give you rain in due season. And by saying that, He's saying, I'll give you just exactly the right amount of rain, not too little, so that you have the big drought like we're seeing in California that makes the situation ripe for the kind of fires and firestorms, wildfires and firestorms like we're seeing in that first story. And on the other hand, when God says, I'll give you rain in due season, the right amount of rain, not too much so that we have flooding, like we've just seen here in Utah with 9 people, at least 9 people so far having been killed, and 5 others missing. And then we have this story out of France, Brother Reuben. The caption for this photograph, friends, reads, the Dôme de Neg is easy to access and popular among climbers. 7 climbers have been killed and another seriously injured in an avalanche in the Pelvoux region of the French Alps, officials say. The avalanche happened around noonday, local time would be 10 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, on the 4,000-meter high, that would be equivalent of 13,000-foot high, Dôme de Neg des Écrins mountain, according to reports. Foreigners are among the dead, but nationalities are yet to be revealed. The Dôme de Neg is said to be popular among climbers because of the relatively easy routes to the summit. The avalanche hit 3 groups of climbers, officials told local media. Rescuers are still checking to determine whether there are any more victims. And we do have a map with this story that shows you, if you look toward the bottom center where Pelvoux is, in France, near the border of Italy, just below and somewhat below Switzerland, which is popular for climbers as well. So Reuben, who was the firstborn of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, but Reuben lost the birthright because of a sexual immorality sin that he committed that caused God to take the birthright from Reuben and pass it on to Jacob and Jacob's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob having gotten a double portion, and he passed that on, and the name, did I say Jacob? Joseph having gotten a double portion, and having passed on the blessings of Joseph to his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who carry the name of Joseph. Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Israel, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But him having the 2 sons who carry his name, sometimes the tribes, when they're counted or divided up, it comes out to 13 tribes, because when you count the lost 10 tribes, the 2 tribes of or the two half-tribes, the two sons of Joseph, are each counted as tribes among the 10 lost tribes. So maybe a little bit to take in at one moment. We'll be commenting on that and that kind of thing again another time. Now, Mexico. It's been confirmed that there were 8 Mexicans. Well, not Mexico. Actually, this story relates to Egypt, but Mexicans in Egypt who were killed. 8 Mexicans among the 12 tourists killed by the Egyptian army in the western desert is what our next story is about. Friends, we've got video showing how Egypt has apologized that the victims were mistaken for Islamist militants during an anti-terror operation. Mexico, as you'll see in this video, has demanded an urgent explanation. Orla Gurin reports from Cairo.
This is what became of a safari in the desert after an army helicopter turned its firepower on Mexican tourists. The authorities say they entered a restricted zone and were mistaken for militants, but they were travelling with a police escort. Mexico's ambassador here says his countrymen had no chance to take cover.
The survivors told me that they were attacked, that all of a sudden when they had stopped without any warning, they were attacked and that they were bombed.
And all of this happened when they were having a barbecue?
Well, they had stopped for lunch because the idea was to spend a little bit more time and continue on the way to reach one of the oases.
The golden sands that lured the tourists are also proving attractive to Islamic State. Officials claimed the tour organisers did not coordinate with the security forces. Then this emerged, the itinerary they had sent to police. Awad Fathi managed the hotel which organised the trip. He was due to be married in 3 days, but died in the desert alongside his guests. His friend Amr Imam, a human rights lawyer, drove hundreds of miles yesterday to reach the so-called restricted area.
All along the highway, from Cairo until I got to the scene, there was no security of any kind. The area is open and there's no indication it's restricted. I didn't pass a single checkpoint.
Tonight, relatives and friends are mourning Awad. For the bereaved here and in Mexico, there are many questions. The Egyptian government has launched an inquiry, but it has a poor record in investigating its own security forces. Orla Gurin, BBC News, Cairo.
And friends, there's a lot of trouble in the Middle East, in Israel, around Jerusalem. The caption with this opening photograph with this story reads, Israel said it would introduce mandatory minimum penalties for those who endanger human lives by throwing stones, firebombs, and explosives. The Israeli Prime Minister has vowed to use all necessary means to stop stone throwers after an Israeli man died in a car crash linked to such an attack. Benjamin Netanyahu's statement came after an emergency meeting of his cabinet and security chiefs. Alexander Levlevitz died in a car accident apparently caused by a rock-throwing attack in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters continued for a third day in the city. On the eve of the Jewish, and we've got a map here I'm going to put on the screen so you can see where some of the major places in Jerusalem are located on this map. On the eve of the Jewish New Year, we once again saw how throwing stones can kill, Mr. Netanyahu said in his statement. Now we're talking of the Jewish New Year, which they celebrate from the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, the first day of the 7th month forward, which That first day happens to be a holy day that some here in the United States and around the world celebrate. Many Jewish people celebrate it, and others who observe the Feast of Leviticus 23 observe it as the Feast of Trumpets. These continuing the quote by Mr. Netanyahu, these kind of activities will be met with a very fierce, punitive, and deterring response, Mr. Netanyahu's message and statement said. Now, looking at the stories related to Jerusalem, Israel, the Middle East, there's some stories in today's news on whether Hamas can hold back ISIS, and we'll be probably going over those in the next few days. But the question is, will Hamas even want to hold back ISIS? There's a saying, popular saying, that goes, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," and both Hamas and ISIS, have a mutual enemy in Israel. Now, we've got several videos related to what's happening, in videos from today's news with respect to what's happening with the migrant problem in Europe. The first one out of Hungary, where Hungary's latest response to the migration crisis has been strongly condemned by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Hundreds of people are stranded at the Serbian border after Hungary closed the frontier by building a razor wire fence. The aim, of course, is to stop migrants trying to enter the European Union after new Hungarian laws came into effect overnight. Fergal Keane reports from the border at Horgoz.
Their Prime Minister says they're guarding the gates of Christian Europe. And today we watched as those gates were firmly shut. As the news rippled across to the Serbian side, people ran to try and find a gap.
Now you can see people streaming towards us across the fields, and I can hear shouts of men, the cries of children, all moving towards this border. Clearly a panic has set in about being able to move on from Serbia.
A state of emergency had just come into force. A pause, a rush, but it's hopeless. Now Hungary is arresting and deporting any who try to avoid police checkpoints, leaving the desperate and the angry.
We are in the war. We're losing our family, our children. Why do that? Germany and the big countries say hi to the refugees. Why Hungary do that?
Looming over all of this is fear. The government insists Hungary's identity is threatened, that a country which has experienced so many invasions faces another. And in Budapest, they insisted people should apply for asylum when they land on European shores.
Police is going to keep order. Obviously, those people shouldn't be there. Again, following European protocols, after being apprehended at the border as illegal migrants, they have designated places where they should stay and wait until their case is being judged. They don't comply with the rules, and that's a fundamental problem.
Like many countries along this route of refugees and migrants, there's been shock for the local population at the sheer scale of numbers. Imre and Silvia are local Hungarian farmers. It's bad. It matters, says Silvia. It makes you feel tense and unsettled when they go in our streets. All day, as the standoff continued, more people arrived. Here on the Serbian side, young Pakistanis, migrants from Lahore, among the large numbers of single men coming. But most we met were Syrians or Afghans. And as the evening wore on, families began to camp out, unsure of what would come next. Maher, an engineer and a father from Damascus, was exhausted.
We are escaping from war and fighting another war in order to get our freedom, to maybe live in peace. That's only what we want.
Open the door! Open the door! Chanting "open the door" again and again, but it will have no effect on the Hungarian side. There is real determination over there not to let people through.
With gates and bureaucracy, the reality of exclusion comes home.
The German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called on other EU states to show spirit and unity to resolve the migration crisis. Over the past month, Germany has taken a lead in accepting refugees, but has recently tightened border controls to cope with the influx. Officials estimate 800,000 migrants will have arrived in Germany by the end of the year. We've mentioned that to you several times before here, friends, in our nightly news. But some of the migrants, some people expect the figure to be much higher than 800,000. Damian Grammaticus reports.
Munich Central, Europe's asylum hub. But now, as the continent squabbles, the arrivals here have slowed markedly.
I don't know this place, but...
Still, Nassim Zaza and his friends, former soldiers from Afghanistan, today told me that for refugees heading this way, Germany remains the destination of choice.
Germany is better than any another country. Germany is good because they want the refugee, they want to the refugees stay in this country. They need the refugees.
But has Germany's generosity caused this crisis? Some Eastern European nations say it has, and they've refused refugee quotas. So today, Angela Merkel's own ministers were urging her to hit back, to withhold EU funds from countries that won't help. But she was more cautious.
It's
true. Germany, Austria and Sweden cannot fix the problem alone. I think we need to create a European spirit again. Making threats won't work. It's not the first time we've disagreed in Europe.
With Germany's own asylum system straining and critics at home saying the situation could slip out of control, Mrs. Merkel has ordered border checks. Anyone found transporting refugees risks arrest. But the frontiers remain open. Asylum seekers still welcome. Germany's history has shaped its accommodating attitude. The memory that in the Second World War, millions of Germans too had to flee their homes seeking sanctuary. And how, when the East German regime crumbled and communism collapsed, there were more upheavals. More had to be taken in. Meanwhile, today's Germany is prosperous. Unemployment is the lowest it's been for a generation. The population is aging. So Mrs. Merkel's policy of welcoming refugees is pragmatic too, and for now enjoys majority support.
We need migrants to come to help us economically. Now the refugees coming right now, there's a lot of skilled people. This is a lot of people we really need to fill in the lack of young people we have.
The danger is that the longer this crisis goes on, the deeper the rifts that may open up, both here in Germany and between Europe's nations, who are already divided and seemingly unable to act. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Munich.
And friends, there are some reports that are calling the influx of migrants into Europe, they're calling it a Muslim invasion into an otherwise quote-unquote Christian culture. So, and in such incredible numbers. Italy's foreign minister Paolo Gentiloni has told the BBC that it must be made clear to EU states that they cannot cherry-pick how much responsibility they share for resolving the migrant crisis. Now, interesting that Germany's interior minister is like Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel are seemingly calling the shots on these things. The Interior Minister has suggested his country could withhold aid money from Eastern European members if they did not accept their quota of refugees. Mr. Gentiloni, you're going to hear him here, say how member states should practice solidarity and should not be cherry-picking.
Frankly, I don't think that a European member state can have towards Europe an attitude choosing what he likes and refusing what he doesn't like.
But that's exactly what's happening.
Yes, and we have
How do you stop that? I mean, the German Interior Minister said last night the EU should consider sanctions. These countries get an awful lot of money in development aid. Should the EU be openly talking about perhaps cutting that if they don't cooperate?
I think that this could be one of the issues that we should discuss. We asked with my German colleague to convene a meeting of the European foreign ministers in the next 10 days. And I think this could be one of the issues to discuss.
So sanctions will be one of the issues on the table for those countries who won't take part.
I wouldn't say sanctions, because I don't want to begin from the end of the process. I will say we have to explain to all the member states that you can't have a European cherry picking. If Europe is there, you have a lot of subsidies, you have a lot of cooperation, you should also practice solidarity.
Okay, so now that was the Italian Prime Minister. Let me roll this back and get his name for you here in a moment. That was Italy's Foreign Minister, Paolo Gentiloni. And he's the one that made the statement that, as you heard, that the EU states cannot be cherry-picking and that they should be practicing solidarity. And a reference was made back to the German Interior Minister who spoke the night before. In their interview, they made reference back to the Interior Minister of Germany, suggesting that his country could withhold aid money from Eastern European members if they didn't accept their quota of refugees. Now, I'm repeating that because I may have confused you as I was introducing that, because the man on the screen is the Italian Foreign Minister, Paolo Gentiloni. And they quoted the German Interior Minister. Okay, I think we cleared that up. And our next story also related to the migrant problem and what's happening on the Hungarian-Serbian border. We have an update from today's news. Hungarian security forces have blocked off a railway track, which is the main informal crossing point used by migrants entering Hungary from Serbia. The move came as Hungary completed the security fence, as you'll see in this video, along the border, and announced tough new measures will come into force from midnight tonight, including arresting illegal immigrants. BBC reporters Christian Fraser and James Reynolds report from both sides of the border.
The crossing point, which many of these refugees know about from social media, is now closed. And of course, those who are too late are being turned around. They're being turned down this embankment and being sent this way. I can't actually see how many of them are coming to this point, but our correspondent, our colleague, James Reynolds, who's been reporting in Serbia today, you can see is standing there across the fence. He can't get to me and I can't get to him, but James, you can see what the picture is further down this railway line.
Yes, Christian, in the last few minutes, I've been watching several dozen refugees come up these train tracks. They'd obviously been hoping to get to where you are, just that last 20 meters, but this line of police is stopping them, and they're pointing them down this hill. I can see a few dozen refugees in the distance walking. We're told they have to walk for 2 kilometers. There is one elderly gentleman here who's got a walking stick, who's exhausted and who can't quite make it down the hill. These people, of course, had hoped to get straight in through the train tracks, but Hungary is telling them they have to go this way to a separate border crossing.
And James, there's going to be much tougher law in place from this evening, so it would be punishable by a prison sentence if you come over the fence or under it or through it. What we don't know is what happens when they get to the 6 official crossing points along this fence, further down here, a kilometre. Is there any word for these refugees as they arrive here as to what might happen?
No, there have been a couple of volunteers that we've seen standing about here in fluorescent jackets in the last few minutes, and all they've told people is simply, first of all, they said, sit down on the tracks, catch your breath, and then they said, walk 2 kilometers further to the other crossing. And of course, the refugees, the migrants, asked them, is it open? Will we be able to get across? And all they're told at the moment from here is keep walking. We walked about a half an hour along the train tracks, and every few minutes people would stop us and ask us if we knew any information. So I think it's very clear that they're not entirely sure what's going on, but they do know that they have to turn this way.
The interesting thing is that just down these railway tracks, the NGOs, the humanitarian organisations have really got their act together today. There are tents down there, plenty of water and food for people. It's been a searingly hot day here on the border. But of course, no one's coming through here now. This operation is practically redundant because they're being sent down this way. And we are getting word from the Hungarian media that some of them are being put straight onto buses or onto trains and sent further into the country. So finally, after some pretty miserable sits here at the border, they've got their act together, and it's too little too late.
And we've got an update, friends, with Lise Doucette on this story, where hundreds of migrants are stuck on the Serbia-Hungary border after the Hungarian government closed the frontier with a new razor wire fence, as you saw in this report. Alexander Vulan, the Serbian minister in charge of the government's working committee on migrants, visited the scene. He told the BBC's Lise Doucette that the Hungarian government had not officially informed Serbia that it would be closing the border, and that Serbia was talking to the Hungarians through the fence. Okay, something went wrong with that update. So, but we're going to stay on top of this. I'm sure there'll be much more in tomorrow night's news and tomorrow's news related to this influx of migrants, huge number of migrants, and this fence being set up, and those who illegally cross as of tomorrow will be arrested after midnight tonight. That is. Okay, now let me see if I can resolve. I think we resolved a little problem we were about to have. Okay. All right, friends, we do this program live, and so we have to deal with whatever happens while we're live. Now, this next story. What moves global markets? You know, the China market, we've been reporting on how they devalue their dollar. Their stock markets took a nosedive, and so did some around the globe. In this next 60-second outline, the BBC explains the different kinds of factors that can affect global markets, and all related to China and what's happened in China. Now, for those of you who are listening by podcast, I'm going to do my best to read the subtitles that go with this video as this video plays. Why is the Chinese stock market so volatile? Its benchmark stock index, the Shanghai Composite, can swing wildly. It might go up like this, 6% it's showing in this video, 5%, and down like this in one day. 80% of its investors are retail investors. They prefer lower risk, and they are less experienced, and may be more vulnerable to market speculation. But all markets are different. Japan's Nikkei traders on the strength of the yen. In the U.S., the price of oil, government economic data, and interest rates move markets. In Europe, it's the instability of the Eurozone and its debt crisis. One thing's for sure, it's not just one factor that rocks global markets. And that's the special report there by the BBC on that. Friends, there's been a lot of news related to World War II, and as Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, God's apostle for the end time, has said before he died in 1986, and his words are more alive today than they were when he spoke them. He said that we're only in an interim between round 2 and round 3 of World War. And as we see some of the memorabilia from World War II, we should be thinking that, as Mr. Armstrong, God's apostle, put it, we're just between rounds of World War. This video from today's news shows a Flypast involving Spitfires and hurricanes has taken place to mark, they call one of them airplanes a hurricane, has taken place to mark 75 years since the decisive encounter of the Battle of Britain. Robert Hall has this report.
If the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
A September day on the airfield once known as RAF West Hampnet. The roar of Merlin engines and the blue haze of exhaust smoke as a new squadron scrambled back into wartime history. On September the 15th, 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched 2 of the largest raids ever mounted across the Channel. By that stage, the battle in the skies was 2 months old. Exhausted RAF pilots flying mission after mission as the bombers attacked first airfields, then towns and cities. On that September morning, over 1,000 aircraft battled for superiority. The RAF had no reserves left, but by evening, all enemy formations had been driven off. 97-year-old Nigel Rose was here on this day a lifetime ago.
You had been trained to try and shoot down these enemy aircraft. I don't think you really understood that this might be a fairly important sort of situation, which will go down in history.
Pilots immortalised as Churchill's few have always acknowledged the many, those who kept them and their aircraft flying. Today at St Paul's Cathedral, survivors and their families gave thanks for the strength they found and the sacrifices made. Above the communities they protected, the Spitfires and Hurricanes soared, watched by a royal visitor who'd given up his seat to send another battle veteran aloft. 95-year-old Tom Neal flew over 150 missions that summer.
There were 550 people who lost their lives during the Battle of Britain, and they're all, to a greater or lesser degree, my own friends. Of course, I thought about it even more so now.
There are less than 30 Battle of Britain pilots left, but the sight and sound of these aircraft are still drawing new generations into their story. Robert Hall, BBC News, Goodwood.
And friends, we're going to go next to a story related to Syria from today's news. With thousands more refugees trying to make their way through Europe, the growing crisis is being driven in part by the war in Syria. The war is now in its 5th year with no real prospect of an end to the violence. We've got this special report again from today's news with Jeremy Bowen reporting from the front line in Damascus, where shelling is having terrible consequences on both sides.
Colonel Ramiz Sultan has a short drive to work. He commands a sector of the front line that runs along a busy, densely populated avenue. A couple of minutes' drive from the homes of several thousand people is Joba, one of the capital's key battlegrounds. Colonel Sultan and his men are from the elite Republican Guard. Hundreds of yards of military positions have been carved out of the wreckage of homes. The people who lived here escaped with their memories and not much else. The colonel and his men say they are patriots fighting terrorists. He rejects accusations that the Syrian army targets civilians.
The claim is that more civilians are killed by the Syrian army than by any other armed force here in Syria.
This is all propaganda to slam the reputation of the army. It's all lies. We were brought up not to harm peaceful civilians. We only kill people we see with our own eyes holding a weapon.
Close by in a desert of blasted concrete are rebel positions. The colonel also said that any civilians near armed rebels must be supporting them. The army has attacked repeatedly. Its soldiers have not been able to force the rebels further from the city centre. The army has the heavier weapons. They pound the suburbs held by the rebels, where many civilians still live. On the rebel side, this is what it's like to be on the receiving end. Until the war ends, Syria will go on exporting violence and refugees. Its shockwaves have rocked Syria's neighbors. Now they're reaching Europe. This is why half Syria's population has fled, why millions of parents want to get their children out of harm's way. Rebel fighters in the suburb of Douma launched new attacks in the last few days, cutting a vital road. The war ebbs and flows, but no side has a decisive edge. To get one, the rebels have dug tunnels under army positions, and the army's been blowing them up. The war has gone underground. The Syrian army dug into this 800-meter tunnel, which it says was part of a rebel plan to attack the city center. If armed rebels broke through here, they could be in the heart of Damascus in minutes.
So they put the sandbags there because on the other side there are mines to stop their opponents moving up the tunnel, and what they want is for the blast to be channeled back towards the people coming towards them.
A Syrian Republican Guard officer said the West should help them fight jihadists instead of funding some rebel groups.
What should Britain do?
Britain should stop supporting the terrorists in politicians. They are giving the terrorists a cover for protect in the world. And now you see, we are become like Afghanistan.
It's one thing for people, politicians, a very long way from here, to talk about the need for some kind of a deal to end the war, but viewed from the battlefield, that looks further away than ever. The dynamic of war has taken over in Syria, not politics or diplomacy.
Across Damascus, you can hear the war. Syria is at the epicenter of Middle Eastern turmoil. Power cuts mean that the nights are dark, so's the future. Jeremy Bone, BBC News, Damascus.
Friends, North Korea says it is improving its nuclear weapons, quote, in quality and quantity, after resuming what it describes as normal operations at its main nuclear facility. The communist state suspended activities at the Yongbyon reactor complex in 2007 in return for diplomatic and economic incentives. But in 2013, it announced it would restart all operations following joint military drills carried out by the U.S. and South Korea. The announcement is the first official confirmation that this has happened. BBC News has taken a look at what is known about North Korea's nuclear capabilities. This one will have subtitles, and for those of you who are listening by podcast, like I try to do on all of them, I'll do my best to read the subtitles to you as this video plays. How advanced is North Korea's nuclear program? North Korea detonated nuclear devices at a remote site in 2006, 2009, and 2013. It's not known if its nuclear devices can fit onto missiles. North Korea produces nuclear material at a reactor complex in Yongbyon. After an international agreement, the site began to shut down in 2007. Talks broke down, and the reactor was first restarted in 2013. North Korea says it has now resumed normal operations and is improving the quantity and the quantity of its weapons. And that's the special report that the BBC prepared for that. And, you know, friends, I have a story related to... we did. We gave you that story on Israel. Well, we weren't on last night because yesterday was the Feast of Trumpets, and I was off for observances with my church on that day. And so we're going a little bit longer tonight. I have one more story. This one's kind of interesting. It relates back to that story on the Flypast and the Battle of Britain. And because Prince Harry's involved in this one, I think maybe we'll just close with this one tonight. The lead-in for this story reads this way, friends. The biggest flypast of hurricanes and Spitfires since the Battle of Britain is due to take place earlier today, this afternoon. Wing Commander Tom Neal, now 95, who flew 141 combat missions during the battle, is due to take to the skies. Prince Harry was due to fly a two-seater Spitfire, but the BBC's Robert Hall says the aircraft has become unserviceable. The Prince has given up his place to enable Battle of Britain veteran Tom Neal and 2 wounded servicemen to fly. We'll close tonight, friends, with this report by Duncan Kennedy from Goodwood in West Sussex.
Well, those preparations are being slightly knocked about by the wind and the rain that we've got going on here today, and also the softening of the runway itself. They're not sure whether they can get all those aircraft away. You made reference to Prince Harry there. He's right across in that gaggle of people between those 2 aircraft over there, the 2 Spitfires. I'm not sure if that's one of the ones he'll be flying in. He'll be going up in a 2-seater Spitfire at some point this morning. They've had all their briefings, they've had all their look at the weather, the conditions and everything. We'll be deciding in the next couple of hours whether the event gets underway on time, as you said, to mark this 75th anniversary of this amazing turning point in the Second World War, the Battle of Britain. One of those who is going going to be taking part today alongside Prince Harry is Squadron Leader Duncan Mason. Duncan, first of all, a day in history, the 75th anniversary of this great changing battle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a phenomenal moment in time. As you said, it changed the course of world history, and certainly in British history, you know, certainly up there with the battles of Trafalgar and Waterloo, an absolute turning point and pivotal that we remember it as a nation.
Heavy losses on that day, the Germans more than 60, the British 30, 31 or so, most of them Spitfires. Why was it a turning point? What did these Spitfires and all these pilots do on that day to change Hitler and Germany's plans?
Well, as you've just mentioned, the fighting was particularly fierce on the 15th of September. However, the Luftwaffe were expecting to deal a decisive blow, and it was clear from that day that that wasn't going to happen. And of course, then Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of the UK, was cancelled just a few days after that. So it really was a pivotal moment.
All right, friends, and again, just a reminder that all of that history related to World War II, that was just the second round of World War. A third round is coming. We'll have more to say about that in future programs because, well, I'll just say just this little bit as we close off tonight. That is, there's a revival yet of the Holy Roman Empire that is coming. And that revival, I got to switch this. Let me go back to something. That revival, if we pull out here, let's go in for just a moment. As we close up tonight, let me just review one of the slides we have on this board over my right shoulder. And that is if we zoom in right in the middle here on this crown of the Holy Roman Empire. That crown is going to be worn for one last time during the seventh and final restoration and revision of the Holy Roman Empire. We don't know who that leader will be yet, but when it does occur, what we're seeing now is United Europe or some confederation change of it. It'll come down to 10 rulers, 5 from the east, 5 from the west, giving their power to one dictator, one new emperor, one final seventh head of the Holy Roman Empire, who will be crowned in a coronation ceremony in Frankfurt, Germany, by the Vatican's representative, the Pope, who has in the past crowned all of the kings who restored the Holy Roman Empire. Now, there were 7 in the past. The Bible reveals that in Revelation chapter 17 and in verse 10, where through the Apostle John, God inspired him to write after having a vision on the Isle of Patmos in about 90 A.D. John was inspired to write that there are 7 kings. And he said 5 of those 7 kings are fallen. Now, at the time he wrote, those 7 kings hadn't even began their reigns yet. Each one of them hadn't even been born yet when John wrote verse 10 of Revelation 17. And yet, through inspiration, through a vision God gave him, he was able to know and write that there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. Now, the one who is was the one that, let's go back to this chart over my shoulder. The one who is one of these first 6 photographs here. The 7 kings, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. That 1 is pictured over here on the far right side in the second row as Mussolini. And he reigned between 1936 and 1945. So he was the one that the Apostle John in Revelation 17, verse 10, was prophesying ahead of time to say, 5 are fallen, 1 is. And God revealed this 1 is as Mussolini through his end-time apostle, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, who in 1936 was broadcasting coast to coast in the United States. And God's apostle, Herbert Armstrong, announced after Mussolini invaded Ethiopia and proclaimed himself, after having made a concordant with the Vatican, he then announced himself as the restorer of the Holy Roman Empire and its new emperor. And he was its sixth head. So now 5 are fallen, 1 has come and gone. It's now 6 are fallen. And the part of Revelation 17, verse 10 that says, and 1 is yet to come, is what brings the reality to this crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which will be passed on to that 7th head, who revives and restores the Holy Roman Empire. Holy because there will be another concordant with the Vatican. The Pope will come over, hold the coronation ceremony for this coming 7th head of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, a lot of the news that we share with you here on Nightcast each night, we are focused, friends, on watching for things that will lead to Europe coming together into 10 nations, and that could happen overnight. That could happen so quickly it could make your head swim. And then those 10, and in fact, it could even happen secretly, and their appointment of an emperor be made, and the Pope on the way over to Frankfurt, Germany, and they'll do it up on the 2nd floor of the Romer building inside of what is known as the Kaisersaal, or in English, the Emperor's Hall. And once that happens, that will begin. Well, let's go right back to that. We're going to go back to the photographs and go into that crown one more time, just to read you quickly the summary here, and then we'll close up for tonight. You'll see on this slide that's the time of the Great Tribulation, the time of revival of World War III it will be then. It'll be the time of a great martyrdom of God's people, of God's saints. It'll be the time of 2 witnesses roaming the earth and giving testimony of explaining, from God's point of view what's happening. But men won't listen, they won't repent. And it'll be the time of those of you who are watching world news, which we try to help you to do on this program, that relate to the seals of Revelation, and who are then praying from the bottom of your heart earnestly about these events and praying, thy kingdom come, and praying about each one of these things. Now, you saw a lot of things, and those people will be taken to a place of protection for 3.5 years. Now, I'm just going to leave it basically at that. But you've seen in tonight's news that we've shared with you here, friends, you've seen a lot of things that you can now take to bed with you from the United States. You heard of the fire that's still raging in California, that has taken 1 life so far and destroyed many people's homes, destroyed their lives essentially for some time into the future. We saw the flooding in Utah, where at least 9 people have died and 5 are missing. That right from the United States, you can be praying about what's going on here as the United States turns into a modern-day Sodom or Gomorrah, with the consequences that are coming upon this country prophesied to be as great, if not greater, than what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah, with fire and brimstone raining down from hail, fire, and brimstone raining down from heaven upon those 2 cities. God says through the prophet Ezekiel, and I better close this up after I remind you of this, from Ezekiel 6:6, God says, if this nation doesn't repent, this nation of modern-day descendants of Jacob, through Joseph's son Manasseh, and you in the United Kingdom as well, if we don't repent of our evil and things like laws for same-sex marriage and just same-sex sex that should not be happening, that's sodomy, that's disgusting in God's sight. He calls it a great evil in Genesis that Sodom and Gomorrah were doing. Some people try to say, oh, they weren't doing that bad. You're not reading all the scriptures that relate to Sodom and Gomorrah if you say that. But God prophesies through Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 6, that all of your cities will be laid waste. Some of you will not wake up the morning after that happens. Some of you who maybe live in the suburbs will wake up and discover the horrifying news that all, not just like New York City, but all of the cities of the United States and of the United Kingdom and of Canada have been laid waste. And the enemy who did it will be swooping in and picking up their survivors and putting them into captivity. That's what God prophesies in His words. We talk a lot about that on the weekends on a different channel. We'll be talking about it here from time to time, but I better sign us off, friends. We're running a little over an hour now. And we'll be back, God willing, again tomorrow night, Wednesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.